Batman, the Imposter, issue 1, Mattson Tomlin and Andrea Sorrentino on the art. This is a new Black Label book. It is obviously not in continuity, it's just a separate Batman universe. And this is an oversized book. It's a good 50 pages or something like that. This is book 1 of, I think, 3?
Yeah, it seems like it because they had a trade listing in the solicits.
Yeah, so... 3. 4 a push.
Oh, this is why.
What?
I looked up the writer, and I was like, what else has he worked on? And apparently he's a screenwriter. You want to guess what he wrote?
Is it the Batman?
It is. And I was like, that's why I felt that was going to be my main takeaway from this. I go, this is odd that this is going to exist in the same place as the Batman. The Matt Reeves. And then it's like, oh, because it's from one of the same creators.
It does feel a little bit like the same sort of steampunky, more grounded vibe that movie seems to be going for.
The vibe, I'm not going to talk about the actual book, just the vibe. I am a sucker for this kind of Batman. We're playing with the world of Gotham, and we're getting little bits and pieces of it, and it's kind of taking what we know and turning it just a little bit. So yeah.
Honestly, the only critique I really have of the writing is not really a critique at all. It was something that I thought was confusing, but then wasn't when I realized who was in the first couple of pages. So there's a woman in the first couple of pages where Batman kind of lands on her fire escape bleeding, and the narration at first, okay, this is clearly her, and she's surprised that Batman's lying there, and then it sort of shifted to the next page where it sounded like Alfred was narrating all of a sudden, and I was confused. And the reason why I was confused is because when you get to the next page, it turns out this is Leslie Tompkins, and all of a sudden the narration makes sense, because I thought the whole point of this story at the start was this is a stranger who Batman's just happened to land in their fire escape.
Well, it's because we're not used to Leslie Thompson being a person of color. Or
Tompkins, yeah. Which is totally fine, but there was nothing to tell me until like page 3 or 4 that this is who that was. So I just didn't get it. I thought the narration had switched to a different character, but once I realized that's who it was, I was like, oh, this all makes sense. This is fine. So I thought this was excellent.
Is she in the movie?
Let me just get this out of the way. I thought this was excellent.
Yeah, so I text Pete earlier today and be like, hey, I'm kind of crunched on time. What are you reading so I know what to read? And he suggested I read this one because it's Sorrentino, and it's a little bit shorter than it was this or Urban Legends. I am glad I did not skip this. Like, this is something I would have got to maybe next week. I am so glad that I picked this up.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think there's any implication that this has anything to do with the movie. I think this is completely separate. This is not in the same world or anything.
No, I don't think it does either, but I'm looking to see if Tompkins is in the movie. But yeah, no, this is very good, and it doesn't hurt that Sorrentino is a master of pacing, because this was 50 pages, 49 pages.
It went in quick. It did not feel
moves.
Yeah.
No, and part of me feels like that. Sorrentino is fantastic, but he's really good at adapting writers in his art. So in this guy that wrote it, Mattson Tomlin, is traditionally a screenwriter. So I'm assuming he's just writing this like he's writing a film script, and just letting Sorrentino go. And I feel like this works to both of their strengths.
Yeah, I mean, the story has a few, obviously we'll go through it here, there's a few different setup beats that are very important, but it does feel like an early days Batman story. We find out later on it's, I think, year 3 of Batman, but it's a very early days Batman. We do hear references to Gordon and some other characters who are not around at the minute, but they do exist in this world. And the crux of the start of this is that she patches him up, and Leslie Tompkins basically gives Bruce this ultimatum where if he doesn't come and sit down for therapy with her every night after he's out doing his Batman stuff, she'll call the police and tell them that Bruce Wayne's Batman and turn him in, because she's not convinced that this is healthy, that what he's doing isn't completely psychotic, and all these other things.
I love how she broke it down as a psychiatrist, that his origin and what impacts that would have on a regular person. And then she's like, and that's not even what stood out to me the most. It was his rage. And I was like, oh man, this is a new take on the, on their relationship even.
I mean, what I liked about it was just how simple the premise is. Like, this is about her concern for him in the early days, thinking that he's got a bit of a madman running around doing what he's doing, and says, no, if you want me to sort of keep doing this and sort of uphold my end of this, then you're going to do this for your own health. And it felt, it felt like, I don't know, like, almost like something out of Mr. Robot, because Elliot and Mr. Robot goes to therapy. And I don't want to get into his conditions because that'll spoil some of the show, but there was definitely almost like some of that vibe going on a little bit, with like, this is a character that we're behind as an audience, who we're kind of rooting for, even though his mental state is a little bit questionable perhaps. But the process of trying to analyze him and like having someone dig into his head is potentially quite fascinating. So it's really good. But there's a whole sequence here where he explains what happened that night, and it's him getting after some guys who were robbing a store, and he gets hit. But there's some wonderful art here from Sorrentino. Like, the store owner gets shot in the shoulder. It does that Sorrentino thing with the sort of the box,
the red
zoom ins where like the coloring changes, and it shows you sort of the focus points, if you will, of the moment. But the sequential stuff's here is great. It ends up bleeding into a car chase, where Batman's on a motorbike chasing after them in a car. All wonderful stuff. It flows so well. There's the coloring changes when they get outside. It's all red, like the harsh red light of the city. All beautiful stuff. All very stylized. All very deep, inky, dark blacks. Just gorgeous stuff to look at. There's a mood, there's a tone to everything in this, and then that's when, after hearing this, is where Tompkins gives him the ultimatum, as it were. So
I'm looking at this art again as we're talking about it.
Yes,
it's very Sorrentino, but I'm starting to look at Bruce, and I'm starting to see Robbie Pats, and then there's a specific panel at the end that's very much the Robbie Pats version that we've seen in the teasers with the dark eyes, And I was like, that's weird. That's like the new movie coming out. This is very similar to that. And then now that I found out it's the same screenwriter, I was like, oh man. Now I'm looking at Sorrentino's Bruce, and I was like, that's Robbie Pats-esque. I mean, good on him. But good on them for making it still Bruce Wayne enough that I didn't automatically think,
oh sure,
that's just Robbie Pats.
The next page after this scene, though, is a full page spread of Batman looking out at the city. If I was even on a new scene, it's when he's talking to her about how Gotham had its first night with no violent crime in 54 years. And it's just this page of him looking out at and it's very different because all that car chase stuff was all red. This is more of a blue. Right. And it's just the calm city that like he's kind of achieved by doing what he's been doing.
And there's some light in the middle that almost give the city eyes, almost as if the city's looking back at him. And then that bottom panel is Bruce crying, right?
Yeah, it's him. It's like him shedding a tear as Batman. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just like, man, that's what really, that moment right there is where I was like, oh man, okay, I'm liking this.
Yeah, it's something fresh, it's something different. But there's a lot more to set up here, so we get introduced to a lot of interesting ideas. So, Detective Wong, she's our other main character of this book, and she's investigating. She's investigating who Batman is, but she's also investigating kind of, this book kind of brings up some ideas that maybe other books I've not seen explore with Batman. One, for example, being that people are finding random zip lines that have been abandoned, like attached to the rooftops.
I like the conversation that you see with the with the construction guys being like, yeah, it was just a dude. We assumed he was just a day worker. And it's hinted that was Bruce going up there setting those up. Yeah, with these
disguises, of course, is a classic Batman trope. So she goes up to this Wesker building, this rich guy Wesker, who is like being concerned that the Batman's doing up to no good. He thinks the zip lines belong to him. There's some wonderful stuff in the art here. Obviously, he thinks he's a big shot. He thinks he deserves to be privy to police information. And Detective Wong's like, no, like, you're still a citizen. You might, contribute a lot of money to the city, to the police department, but you don't get to be privy to things like, we if we're going to catch Batman and put him away for what he does, then it's going to have to hold up, and that doesn't hold up if I've let information out to the public, which you still count as. But what I loved in the art of these pages There's a few variations on it, but the first one especially is like the panels play out in these almost very cinematic close-ups of like these wide rectangles, but the background of the page is this harsh black and white angel statue, and it's this really overly imposing thing the entire time, and it really gives you this impression of his power and how imposing he's being. And she's holding her own, like sort of like talking him off, but everything here is about showing like that, because you get the impression that this statue we're seeing is probably a statue that's on the outside of the building or something like that. You know, it's something that he's built. It's part of the empire that he's built, so he feels like he's a big shot. So you really get this vibe, and like the dynamics between the characters in this are so well done. In terms of just like quickly setting up who they are, how they feel about each other. You really get into their heads, and then it introduces the guy's son, who seems to have an imaginary friend. He might be completely psychotic.
Well, you know who that is, right?
Remind me, because it didn't trigger for me when I was reading that.
Oh, Pete. Okay, this is also where I was like, oh, they're twisting things.
No. Let me give me a chance to guess before you tell me.
Okay, okay.
Wesker. Wait, is this Scarface? Is this?
So he goes,
ventriloquist,
I don't like it. If we don't, and he goes, shh. And he's already, you know, he's got the balding look going, he's got the glasses, but there's no other indication that this is
I'm annoyed that didn't click for me.
And then the name,
I'm annoyed that didn't click for me when I read it now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay. And then he goes, Arnold, don't shush me. And she goes, sorry? He goes, no, I'm sorry. That's our stop. I guess that's the son no one ever sees. And it's like, oh, man.
Does he usually
introduced us?
Does he usually have a super rich parent? No, I don't think so.
No, so that's what I'm trying to look up right now. And this DC Wiki I'm on is making it very difficult. How I don't think so, because in the most fleshed out version is from the animated series that we've gotten. Because relatively, the ventriloquist is a newer character. He wasn't created until 1988. Oh, yeah. So, yeah.
Do you know what bugs me about that?
Little twist here.
Do you know what bugs me about this? Is that when I first saw the building and it said Wesker, I'm like, okay, does that name mean anything? Is there any characters named Wesker? And I couldn't think of any, so I just assumed it was a new character.
We don't think of him as Arnold Wesker. We think of him as the ventriloquist in Scarface. You know, because Scarface is the bigger character.
I couldn't remember his name though. That was the problem. I couldn't remember his name.
Yeah. So once she said Arnold, it clicked, and then as he's talking to himself, and then I looked at him, I was like, that's ventriloquist. So we're getting a little bit of, you know, Gotham being presented here, you know, and I love that, man. I love the mythos in Gotham.
Well, yeah, I mean, the next few pages are her just narrating over, you know, panels of the city, talking about how, you know, we all look at the effects that Batman's had on crime, had on certain, you know, criminal groups, but what about the economic consequences? That's, you know, that's what this conversation with Wesker's kind of made her think about, is like, what if someone's bankrolling him because he clearly has some sort of money income, you know, some money to spend. Like, what if this is all like, are the same companies being targeted? Is there one rich company that's not being targeted? But she does actually point out that the Wayne, you know, or maybe it was Wesker before, but it was pointed out that a Wayne building did get blown up at some point recently. So
it's do we know when the movie's supposed to be taking place?
It's early.
It's early. So are we gonna see that? Are we gonna see Bruce blow up his own building? Like, is this what he like? A little bit of foreshadowing into what to expect. The movie was supposed to be out by now, right?
Originally, sure, yeah, but but this comic, like, I doubt this comic was planned that far in advance.
I don't know. I do feel like
I think you're reaching here, Matt. I don't think this has anything to do with the movie.
I think it takes place in that general, because it is a black label, so it can kind of play with that. I do think this is set in that Gotham. I really do. And yeah, this might not be canon for, you know, the term, but it's taking place in that time, and you know,
I don't think it is. I don't really care if it is either. Like, I don't want the movie to be beholden to this. I don't want this to. This is working on its own.
That's what I'm saying. I still think it can be in Black Label, but there's a lot of similarities here at play that it's hard to ignore now that I know he's the screenwriter of the film. That's all.
Okay. Okay.
But
So
I also like this introduction. Are we gonna get there to the police crew
oh
that
yeah.
she's gonna be with?
So she goes into the precinct and it does that thing where all the panels actually make a police badge.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bunch of people being brought in to help hunt down Batman, and we're showing. I mean, first of all, we get like her, we get the close up panels of all their heads where she kind of like labels who she knows, but she doesn't know all of them. So some of them are just don't know this guy. Like, where's one of them, which I thought was a nice touch. But basically, this is where the concept of the title of the book kind of comes into play, which is that they get footage of what looks like Batman murdering three criminals on the top of a roof by kicking them off. And it's super, super dark, super sinister. And I love that we get the full close up, pixelated, security camera Batman face. Really nice touch.
Mm-hmm.
So this sets up, okay, we have to stop him now. He's killing people. He's finally crossed that line. We have to do this. And one of them cracks a joke like, "Hey, these three guys," and I love this bit in the writing. That he calls them the three perps, and he's like, "What do you mean perps?" He's like, "Oh, I mean victims," because technically they are victims in this case.
Right, and it's he says because of DA Dent's or District Attorney Dent's genius and not at all misguided crusade against the corruption of the court, cleared them and gave them all get out of jail free cards. So, like, of course, the cops are upset that the DA accidentally got these guys off.
Of course, but I think that's a separate point, though. What I'm meaning is that because of who Batman typically targets, he still referred to them as perps before he thought of them as victims. And I think and that was a really interesting correction I thought that the guy had to point out. But you're right, yeah, they mentioned that these guys were only on the street because Dent they helped uncover corruption, which is very classic, early days Batman stuff.
Yep.
But it did lead some people getting out of prison that did deserve to be there, even though their cases were, meddled with. Yeah.
Also, that line, they've been on the street since Halloween doing God knows what. And I was just like, oh my God. He's making reference to the long Halloween in a metaphor, with Dent and his stuff. Like, oh man.
I don't know if I think that's a reference to Long Halloween, but
why else bring up Halloween though, Pete?
Because it's the horror season, and this came out in October.
I don't know. I just feel like he's having fun. Like, he's not saying, Yeah, I just think he's having fun.
Think Matt's
Halloween.
Matt's got the murder board out. He's got the red strings. He's reaching for connections. That's all I'm saying.
I do like Charlie Day.
Yeah, it is. So, and then what I liked about this next part is that there's a 2-page layout where it shows you Detective looking at like basically discussing the case and how to track down Batman, if he's doing these things. And there's like a big bat in the middle of the panel, or the middle of the page. But then the other side of this 2-page layout is Batman, who's thinking about this imposter and how possibly he can find this imposter and stuff like that. Oh wait, no. So I'm thinking of a later page. No. Yes. Sorry. That's a later page.
I got confused. I'm looking no, Batman's not there.
Yeah, that's a later page. But that is a very good page. But they're both thinking about their case at the same time. This is the page that started bringing up more things that I've not seen brought up before, like the police finding 12 of however many hundreds of bikes that Batman stashed throughout the city, so he can always has like a getaway vehicle stashed nearby. They found like 12 bikes, but none of them are reported stolen. So again, it's kind of hinting that whoever this is, he's got a lot of money, because there's like $1 million worth of motorbikes so far found throughout Gotham City, just waiting to be used. It's an interesting detail. I like kind of this grounded approach to thinking about it. So this was more of her thought process, and then it shows you Tompkins almost phoning the police because it's dawn. She's waited all night for Bruce, but he shows up at the last minute. And I think what's neat about this is that, and I'm glad that I was skipping ahead before, because I kind of love that this is the next time we see him, is that he's back at Leslie Tompkins, because this is like him finally reacting to this imposter. Like, because she holds up a newspaper that says Batman kills, and says, "Is it true?" And he's like, "I thought you knew me." And
right. You know my profile.
Yeah, and then starts talking about, how he's going to track down whoever's doing this. This person's basically getting to hide in plain sight because Batman's going to be blamed for everything. And I think it's later on that he says that if he gets caught, then all of a sudden this guy's scapegoat is gone, because now he can't pretend to be Batman anymore, or reveal that there is two, and therefore basically, redeem the real Batman in the eyes of the public. So
he's been asking around, which is such a great.
Oh yeah, there's probably the most colourful page in the whole book is that page where it says bloody fist, and there's like 3 panels, but one's green, one's red, and one's blue.
Yeah.
One's Cobblepot in the blue panel, for example. Really just wonderful looking stuff. I really like the focus on the close-ups and all these conversations, and the very moody, a lot of shadows, all that stuff. But Tompkins points out that if they think you're a murderer, you're going to be feared by the public, and you're going to also be held. All this leniency you've had from the police up until now is going to be gone. And we hear from the other cops as well that a lot of them don't approve of it. Gordon, Captain James Gordon, at some point in the history of this Batman, has helped Batman and has had a signal on the roof, and they're not cool with that. Interesting stuff. This is one of these things where you almost immediately. The nicest thing I can say about a new Bat book like this, when it's doing like, okay, this is their specific focus on whatever story they're doing, is that immediately I'm like, I kind of want to see like this world's version of all of the big things now. I want to see what's the Joker like in this world? What was Batman's first meeting the Joker in this world? How was the year 1 story in this world with him and Gordon getting to know each other for the first time? Like I almost want to see all these moments because they've done a good job of making me care about this version of the character and the characters that surround him in this world. So,
neat. Well, I know we're gonna kind of see. I want to see Gordon in this world. If he looks like Jeffrey Wright.
well, that'll be a giveaway, I suppose. If he looks like Jeffrey Wright, then maybe we can start talking. We get another villain introduced, though. Another villain tease. We get Ratcatcher. Yeah. Who is presented.
Which, by the way, I only would have recognized because I've seen Suicide Squad recently. With the mask. So.
Well, we get him presented as an exterminator, but he's like a humane exterminator who tries to get the rats gone without killing them, and people give him shit for it and just demand that he goes in and kills them. Yeah. So he puts on his mask and he does it, and he's not very happy. But he calls human beings vermin. Rats are pleasant. Rats are, dogs are more dangerous than rats are, but people just treat them badly. And he gets mugged immediately. I also love that he talks about how he moved to Keystone City for better internet, but he got mugged there too, so he just came back.
Someone beat me and stole my shoe, so I take my chances back in Gotham.
I also just love the nudge that Keystone has quicker internet. It's a Flash City. So at the end of his scene, he's very upset. He notices a Batman and talks about how Batman was actually there. They kind of met once, and obviously we're both assuming this is the imposter, right?
Imposter. Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, it feels that this imposter is going to use him for nefarious means, and it's a shame because you kind of feel sympathetic for this guy because it feels like he really is in a bad place, and he's maybe going to latch on to this Batman, thinking he's the real Batman, and go down a darker path than he should via manipulation. So you feel he's going to be taken advantage of. So, credit. There's the page that I was talking about earlier, where we get the two sides of the investigative minds, where one side's the detective and one side's Batman, and the background to this is the puzzle pieces of all the players in the story. It's just a gorgeous page. There's not really much to say about it other than that.
I do like the split on the bat. Is that on her side it looks like that Bat monster, but on his side it's him.
Yeah, and that's underneath that's in red underneath the jigsaw puzzle, which is all white. And obviously the idea of being a puzzle that's been put together and how that relates to an investigation is obvious. She goes around, Detective Wong. She goes around and interviews Penguin, Black Mask, looking for information. And
they bring up at one point the Sionis family. Wesker does, and about how unless the police start doing a better job, they're leaving town, and we don't want that. So to see Black Masks pop up here, I think is a pretty nice little Easter egg, I guess.
And his underwear as well. Yeah. Worth mentioning. But the final scene of the book is that Bruce is looking at all these crime photos. He's trying to figure things out. The doorbell goes, and the cliffhanger is Detective Wong is there to ask him questions about the Batman. It's a really good cliffhanger because it's really well set up in the book. That she keeps talking about going to ask the rich people. She's starting to suspect that it's someone rich. She's starting to suspect this, and she sort of like all of her reasoning feels like it's eventually going to point to Bruce, but she never actually says the name out loud. The ending with this final cliffhanger is like, this makes sense. This is so justified that she comes here at the end of the book.
I do love it's one of those tropes in Batman comics that I always like. How come a smart person hasn't put this together? So I do like that they're doing that here now.
Mm-hmm. And you suspect that there's going to be possibly a bit of a new Gordon vibe to this, where she's by the end of the story presumably going to learn to at least understand him better, or at the very least believe that he's not killing people, and go from there. You would assume, but it's so well told, and it's all these characters are so well defined, and it feels like a fairly distinct version of Bruce, although he's still very much Bruce. But it's interesting. It doesn't lean on a Gordon. It doesn't lean on an Alfred. Yeah, we see like there's like one panel of Alfred when Leslie's explained the backstory, but there's no focus on him. Maybe we'll just see him next issue, and that's fine. But this was excellent, and the art is like drop dead gorgeous, and is constantly adding to the mood. Yeah, I think we read the premise of this in the solicits. There's someone going around killing people dressed as Batman. So okay, that sounds like a fun premise, but we'll see what they do with it. This is like the best possible version that I could have imagined of this story. I think the Tompkins like therapy angle is really interesting. The actual intimidation factor of whoever this imposter is. Do we have any guesses to who the imposter is?
So it's important that the footage came from Wesker, right? I'm thinking that this is the play on the ventriloquist, is that whoever this is, it's a puppet of the Weskers to try to, push Batman out. Now, I don't know if there's going to be mind control elements. I don't know if they're going to keep it grounded. I do think Wesker's involved. Now, maybe it's not Arnold. Maybe that's the red herring and it's the dad. But the fact that they were the ones that provided the footage of the Batman kicking the people off the building.
It is worth mentioning, even if they're not responsible, although I agree why you think that they might be, because obviously they have this footage, is that what is 100% is that whoever this is wanted to be seen doing this to discredit Batman.
Right. So
that is important.
But yeah, so we'll see where the twists and turns go, but yeah, this was really, really good. Do you have any ideas on who you think it is?
Because we're in a different standalone universe, it's very easy to assume that for the pop, they're going to like pick someone who will mean something to us, right? So, it turns out to be, I don't know, like the first name that popped in my head was Tommy Elliott, right? Yeah. For obvious reasons, with Hush and him actually becoming Bruce at one point, like. But at the same time, is that too trite? Is that too? Yeah,
it's on the nose.
Yeah. Is it more interesting if it's someone who's usually a good guy who's become I don't know, like what if this is Harvey Dent? What if Harvey Dent became the imposter Batman?
Maybe that's what leads to him becoming Two-Face. Is he's having an internal struggle inside.
Who else
that's a good idea though too, because it was his wanting to fix things that put them out. So how does he fix things?
I don't know if there's a mention specifically of the Joker. I'm not suggesting that the imposter is Joker by any means, but I don't know if there's a mention. There is a mention, there was like a kerfuffle at the reservoir or something. There's a line like that, which it sounds like a reference to Joker's first, big Gotham antics, because it usually is involving the water supply. But I don't know if there's a direct reference to Joker himself in this issue, so maybe we are going to see something where the Joker's somehow involved. I don't know. But it does kind of feel like it's ripe for someone like they're giving us teases to the ventriloquist, we're giving us teases to Ratcatcher. It wouldn't surprise me if a much bigger A-list villain is involved in some way by the end of this. It's just a question of who, and are they themselves the imposter, or is the imposter someone like like a good. I don't think it's like the Robins or anything like that, because
no. That'd be kind of lazy. Yeah. I'd be disappointed. What if it's Basil Karlo, not Clayface, the actor?
It's not a terrible idea. All right, Matt, what are you rating it?
I'm gonna give this one a 9.
Yeah, I'm also going to give it a 9. I thought it was fantastic. And if you didn't pick this up because it was a standalone, separate Black Label thing, I highly encourage you to do so. Because it's better than most of the other books you're going to read this week. So
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, it's that simple.